Hi, I'm Joe Graydon.
I'm Terry Graydon. Welcome to this podcast of the People's Pharmacy, where we bring you the stories behind the health headlines.
This podcast is brought to you by Redix Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Body Cream. 800-345-7339, on the web at uttercream.com.
DNA analysis has shown that we have entire ecosystems living in our digestive tracts. How do these microbes affect the brain? This is the People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
The bacteria in our bellies have gotten a great deal of attention lately. They appear to influence the inflammation that underlies so many chronic conditions, such as heart disease, cancer, or even Alzheimer's disease.
We hardly ever imagine that there's a connection between the bowels and the brain, but neurologist David Perlmutter says this link could be fundamental to diseases like dementia, autism, or multiple sclerosis.
Coming up on the People's Pharmacy, learn about the power of gut microbes to heal and protect the brain.
First, this news.
In the People's Pharmacy health headlines, British citizens are now being advised to take vitamin D pills. For years, UK doctors told their patients, just eat a well-balanced diet, no supplements needed. That advice should sound familiar, since it's the same message that U.S. doctors have been offering. But the public health experts have now recognized that in Great Britain, it's too difficult to get enough sunshine to make adequate vitamin D. So they're recommending a supplement of 400 international units per day for everyone. Here in the U.S., the Institute of Medicine suggests a daily supplement of 600 international units for most people. Some experts believe that dose is too low. They argue that people exposed to sun all day would make around 5,000 to 10,000 IUs daily through exposed skin, and think that 5,000 IUs would be a more appropriate level for supplementation, unless people can get their vitamin D the old-fashioned way by going out in the sun.
Despite the recommendations from public health authorities, a new study casts doubt on the value of vitamin D supplements. The randomized controlled trial assigned 230 women in their 70s to get either high-dose vitamin D supplements, low-dose vitamin D supplements, or placebo pills. All of the women had low levels of circulating vitamin D when they entered the study. After a year, the women getting the high dose of 100,000 international units each month had raised their blood levels of vitamin D. There were no measurable differences among the groups on anything that counts. Bone density, muscle mass, muscle function, and falls were the same in all the groups. This study does not offer evidence supporting the use of vitamin D supplements for bone health or fall prevention in older women, and that's the key reason many people take this vitamin.
A new study from China suggests that people who consume spicy foods may live longer and healthier lives. The investigators collected information from nearly 500,000 Chinese adults and followed them for over 7 years. The participants provided information about alcohol and tobacco use, physical activity, diet, and medical conditions. People who frequently ate foods with fresh or dried chili peppers, chili oil, or sauce were less likely to die during that time from cancer, heart disease, or respiratory problems. Women who indulged in spicy foods more than 3 days a week were also less likely to die of infection. People who had spicy food nearly every day were 14% less likely to perish during the study than those who rarely ate it. The investigators hypothesized that capsaicin in chili peppers may have beneficial effects on the microbes of the digestive tract.
Sleep apnea and snoring are common problems affecting nearly a fourth of middle-aged men and 9% of women. Sleep apnea describes breathing that pauses frequently during sleep, from several seconds to a minute or longer. This can lead to daytime drowsiness or fatigue, impaired reaction time and judgment, and a range of other psychological and physiological problems. Irritability, mood swings, headaches, and insomnia are common symptoms. Obstructive sleep apnea may be due to chronic nasal congestion or collapsing airways. The usual recommended treatment is a device to provide continuous positive airway pressure, or CPAP. Although this often works well, many people find it too uncomfortable to use regularly. A Swedish study just tested an adjustable, custom-made oral appliance that moves the lower jaw forward slightly during sleep. The 96 participants were randomly assigned to the oral appliance or a placebo appliance for 4 months. The device was able to reduce sleep apnea, snoring, and restless leg symptoms significantly. Unfortunately, it did not reduce daytime sleepiness or improve quality of life.
Japanese researchers have found that people who eat diets high in sodium are more susceptible to developing high blood pressure. They followed 4,500 healthy adults for nearly 4 years. The data from annual checkups included urinary sodium excretion, which provides a good assessment of sodium consumption. Japanese diets are higher in sodium on average than American diets. The people who developed high blood pressure were consuming about 4,500 milligrams a day. The average American is getting 3,600 milligrams daily, while the American Heart Association recommends dropping sodium intake to 1,500 milligrams. And that's the health news from the People's Pharmacy this week. Welcome to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Today we'll be talking about two topics that don't initially seem to go together. Not very long ago, the intricacies of the bacteria in the digestive tract were mostly unknown, except by microbiologists and gastroenterologists. Now, the gut microbiota have become a mainstream topic. What isn't yet mainstream is the connection between the gut and the brain. Today, we'll be learning about how the bugs in our bellies affect our cognitive and emotional responses to the world.
Our guest is Dr. David Perlmutter. He's a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. His books include the #1 New York Times bestseller, Grain Brain, and the new book, Brain Maker.
Welcome to the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Perlmutter.
I'm delighted to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's nice to have you back on the People's Pharmacy, Dr. Perlmutter. You know, until fairly recently, the terms microbiome or microbiota were a mystery. No one had ever heard of them, and most health professionals never learned about the ecology of the digestive tract. Now the microbiome is almost mainstream. Dr. Perlmutter, what is it, and why, as a neurologist, are you so interested in gut microbes?
Those are both very, very compelling questions, and I'd state that, at the very beginning here, we've practiced medicine under this sort of reductionist mentality, looking at the brain being separate from the gut and all the organ systems being separate from each other, and that's really sort of an aberration in the history of mankind. We've always looked upon the body until quite recently as being integrated, that one body part, one body system is integrated to the next, and in fact, that each living organism is integrated into the whole living planet, if you will. So we now have this sense that the brain exists apart from the gut, but as you well indicated in the intro, the leading-edge science is now understanding that there is this incredible integration that goes on between the nervous system and things gut-related. And beyond that, even the very microscopic bacteria that live within the intestines, called the microbiome, this collection of more than 100 trillion organisms, influence every manner of health and have a profound role to play in determining things brain-related. And, as a neurologist, I was trained to believe that the brain is here and the gut is over there. That's what the gastroenterologists deal with, and never the twain shall meet. But we now understand that every nuance of change in the gut bacteria has a profound influence on not only moment-to-moment brain function, but even beyond that, a person's risk for brain degenerative conditions as well. So, it has certainly taken on the spotlight with very good reason.
Dr. Perlmutter, I think a lot of your neurology colleagues aren't quite there yet. So maybe you can tell us a bit more about the science that underlies the link between the gut and the brain.
Terry, I would agree with you that this is not yet mainstream neurology, and we're probably 5 to 10 years away from implementing even therapeutic interventions, treating people based upon this paradigm of this relationship to the gut bacteria. But I will indicate that just 1 week ago, it was really exciting that Medscape, perhaps the most well-respected online resource for physicians, had an incredible review of this relationship between brain diseases, psychiatric diseases, and, as we've talked about now, the gut bacteria. So, again, neurologists think about the brain, and we divide the body up. Gastroenterologists think about the gut. But the science that underlies this relationship is now quite profound. I mean, when you're on the cover of Scientific American, that says this stuff is leading edge. And it makes sense. When you recognize, for example, that the happy neurotransmitter called serotonin that we've developed over the past several decades, drugs to augment, to treat depression, 90% of the serotonin in your body is manufactured by the bacteria living within the gut. The gut bacteria regulate inflammation. And that process, inflammation, is the cornerstone of all degenerative conditions, including Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and multiple sclerosis and diabetes and cancer and coronary artery disease to boot. And that is regulated. The set point of inflammation in human physiology is regulated, determined by the balance, by the array, by the complexion of the very bacteria that live within the gut. So suddenly, we've got to turn our attention to how we cater to these bacteria, which we call the commensals. It's a great term. It means eating together, commensa, eating together, because truly, these bacteria eat what you eat. When you eat a meal, you are nurturing your gut bacteria. These bacteria then go on to help you manufacture vitamins A and C, harvest vitamin C from your food, manufacture some of the B vitamins, create what are called short-chain fatty acids that are an integral part of metabolism. They regulate whether you are fat or lean. They determine your caloric extraction from the very foods that you eat. And most importantly, and this is an area I'm hoping we'll explore, these gut bacteria regulate the permeability or the leakiness of the gut lining. You know, we have a lining 1 cell thick in the entire digestive system that determines what is absorbed and what is not. And when there are changes, when there's been disruption of the gut bacteria, that lining, that gate that guards the systemic circulation from the gut is compromised, and we start to absorb things that are gut-related that we shouldn't be absorbing, and that leads to inflammation, which, as I mentioned, again, is the cornerstone for just about every bad disease you don't want to get.
Well, this is quite extraordinary, and I think a lot of our listeners have heard on the People's Pharmacy, leaky gut syndrome and intestinal permeability, but, the idea that it could have such a profound impact on the brain is quite revolutionary, and I'm sure of some interest to your neurological colleagues. But before we get to the issue of food and which foods are good for the gut and which are bad, and a little bit more about the dangers of gut permeability, you said something a few moments ago that's extraordinary. You said 90% of the serotonin in the body was in the digestive tract. I mean, I think that comes as a huge surprise, again, to your neurological colleagues, because as a neuropharmacology student, I was really interested in serotonin and norepinephrine and acetylcholine, all those neurotransmitters you're so familiar with in the brain. And along comes Prozac, and along comes Paxil, and along comes Zoloft, and these are serotonin reuptake inhibitors, SSRIs, and we're so excited, and we think this has been a huge breakthrough. And you're telling me that, wait a minute, there's serotonin in the gut, and there's more of it, and it too may influence the brain?
Absolutely. Joe, You mentioned the SSRIs, the selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, and the mission there was to increase available serotonin in the brain in hopes of treating depression. Well, the SSRI drugs that you mentioned work to some degree. Very little difference between actually those drugs and placebo. But what we now understand is that the effectiveness of the very drugs you mentioned may have absolutely nothing to do with their effects upon serotonin, but may have more to do with their effects on inflammation. Every drug you mentioned has anti-inflammatory activity within human physiology, and depression is an inflammatory disease. Markers of inflammation are higher in the depressed patient. Markers of gut permeability, like LPS, or lipopolysaccharide, a standard measurement of gut permeability, are profoundly elevated in comparing controls to individuals with major depressive disorders. So, what a notion that we are now understanding that depression is an inflammatory disorder and may well relate back to things going on in the gut. An autoimmune disease that's very, very common is type 1 diabetes. But the other type of diabetes is far more common, type 2 diabetes, which is a metabolic issue. And there's a doctor in Amsterdam named Dr. Max Neerdorp, and I had the opportunity to hear him lecture at Harvard in September. And Dr. Neerdorp has recognized that there is a distinct pattern of the bacteria in the gut of the type 2 diabetic. These are generally individuals who are overweight, have a lot of inflammatory issues, etc. And he said, yes, they have an abnormal gut bacteria. Why don't we change the gut bacteria and see what happens? And what Dr. Neerdorp did in more than 250 patients was a technique called fecal microbial transplant. He actually took filtered fecal material from healthy individuals and placed it into the colon of the diabetic patients. And lo and behold, he reversed the diabetes in these individuals by swapping out their gut bacteria. Now, that really takes your breath away. I mean, your jaw has to hang down when you hear information like that. I'm going to be chairing an international symposium in a few months on exactly, the role of the microbiome in metabolism, and we were fortunate enough to be able to draft Dr. Neerdorp to come over from Amsterdam and present his latest findings. But take a step back and think about that. Think about actually treating diabetes at its root cause by reestablishing metabolic parameters at the gut level instead of just trying to manipulate blood sugar with pharmaceuticals. It is really what I call treating the fire and not just paying attention to the smoke.
You're listening to Dr. David Perlmutter, a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. He's author of the book Grain Brain and the new book Brain Maker, The Power of Gut Microbes to Heal and Protect Your Brain for Life.
And I would have to say that discovery is nothing short of extraordinary, swapping out gut bacteria and changing metabolic reactions. Well, we do need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll find out about the link between inflammation and disease.
Can we really affect conditions like Alzheimer's disease through diet?
Learn about potential benefits of intestinal parasites.
What inflammatory conditions might be treated with parasite therapy?
We'll learn about the role of fermented food in a healthy diet and which are the best fermented foods to enhance your gut bacteria.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon. If you value the health information you get when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, consider subscribing to our email newsletter. You'll get the latest health news and information on upcoming podcasts delivered to your inbox twice a week. Look for the link at peoplespharmacy.com.
Welcome back to the People's Pharmacy. I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is made possible in part by Red X Industries, makers of utterly smooth creams and lotions that deeply moisturize to make dry skin feel soft and smooth. 800-345-7884. 7339. The website is uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of this show, you can call 800-732-2334. This is show number 1002. That number again, 800-732-2334, or find it on the website, peoplespharmacy.com.
Today on the People's Pharmacy, we're looking at the links between the belly and the brain. How does diet affect the inflammation that seems to drive so many chronic conditions? You might be surprised to learn that even intestinal parasites can sometimes have benefits.
Our guest is Dr. David Perlmutter. He's a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. His books include Grain Brain and the new publication, Brain Maker.
Dr. Perlmutter, you've been talking about inflammation and how important it is to our health. And we've actually been hearing about inflammation and the science behind inflammation in connection with heart disease, even with diabetes.
And Alzheimer's disease.
For decades now. But it seems as though it's just now getting to mainstream consciousness. Why is it that something that's been studied for decades is suddenly getting so much traction?
I think the issue really is that in that we've understood inflammation with reference to the areas that you mentioned, but why has the brain been excluded from that discussion for so long? And the truth of the matter is the publications that have related inflammation to Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, MS, etc., have been out for 2 decades at least. But somehow the brain seems excluded from the rest of the body. You know, we have this whole brain versus mind kind of dichotomy, and people don't think of the brain as being made of stuff. It's somewhere else made of something else. No, the brain is stuff, and it's made from raw materials that your body supplies via the food that you eat. Just like your bones are built from the foods that you eat, as are your muscle tissues, so is your brain. And inflammation, this process, which is a very positive, powerful, important way that we're able to heal wounds and get rid of invaders, etc., also occurs in the brain. The very same chemicals that you might have in an inflamed joint if you have arthritis, these cytokines and interferons, etc., that play roles in inflammation throughout the body are also quite active in the brain. When a person has high levels of one, for example, important cytokine called tumor necrosis factor alpha, that would characterize things like diabetes or heart disease, it does correlate just as well with Alzheimer's disease. And in fact, new technology is actually able to image on brain scanning the actual cells in the brain that create these inflammatory chemicals. And when you look at these images, it is absolutely the brain on fire, which is intriguing because the term inflammation comes from the Latin inflammare, which means to set on fire. Now, the downstream effects of inflammation are the creation of what are called free radicals, and these are the most damaging chemicals in human physiology. They damage every tissue. They even damage our DNA. So we've got to rein in inflammation. And again, the message of the day here is that the starting point of inflammation in human physiology is in the gut. That's where the set point is established to determine, are you highly inflamed or is inflammation brought under control? And things gut-related relate directly to the foods that we eat. So we've connected a lot of dots here, going from the foods that we eat to the balance of the bacteria in the gut, to the reduction of gut leakiness, to the reduction of inflammation, to doing right by your brain, connecting food then to the brain. So, you know, the notion of food being related to brain things is certainly new. Martha Claire Morris of Rush University just last week published an incredible report showing actually decreased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease based on dietary intervention, the first trial to actually demonstrate that. So what a notion that a disease, Alzheimer's, for which we have no treatment, that is affecting 5.6 million Americans as we have this conversation, whose incidence will double in just the next 15 years, can be prevented. preventive medicine now in the brain arena related to our food choices. Who knew?
Dr. Perlmutter, what you just said is astonishing. The idea that you could affect your risk of developing Alzheimer's disease with a dietary intervention. What kind of food were they eating? And more importantly, perhaps, what kinds of foods were they avoiding?
I think the biggest issue in terms of avoidance of food would be the carbohydrates, especially the simple carbohydrates that go by the name of sugars. This dates back many years, the data that relates sugar to the process of inflammation, so therefore to the risk of Alzheimer's. In the August 13th issue, 2013, the New England Journal of Medicine was a very compelling report that actually demonstrated, what they did was they took a group of individuals and they measured simply their fasting blood sugars, and then they followed this group of individuals for 6.5 years. And they found that those individuals who had even subtle elevation of their blood sugars had a dramatic increased risk for developing dementia, directly relating blood sugar, which is directly related to dietary choices, to the development of an incurable disease that we call senile dementia of the Alzheimer's type. So the diet needs to be higher in fat, good fat, lower in carbohydrates. That's step one. Now, as we understand the important role of the microbiome, I think we can take that recommendation a lot further and recognize that we really want to get back to a diet that caters to the health and the array of bacteria, the diversity of the bacteria that live within the gut. An interesting study came out of Cambridge last year that looked at the risk of developing Alzheimer's in over 100 countries in comparison to measures of gut bacterial diversity and parasite load. Those countries that actually had the highest level of different organisms in the gut, when they measured that, as well as the highest levels of parasites in the gut, had the least incidence of Alzheimer's disease. Places that had poor hygiene, like various countries in sub-Saharan Africa, like Kenya, for example, in comparison to places where people are so involved with hygiene, like Northern European countries and certainly the United States, where we have hand sanitizers at the end cap of every aisle in the grocery store, so we compromise our bacterial load, we have a lot higher risk of developing Alzheimer's. Now, this is a correlation study. It certainly doesn't, mean causation, but it's important nonetheless to understand that a diversity of organisms in the gut is a good thing. It's associated with a reduced risk of obesity, a reduced risk of inflammatory disorders, reduced risk of autoimmune diseases, and even a reduced risk of diabetes, all of which are risk factors for brain degeneration. And then, we obviously need to segue into a discussion where we ask ourselves, well, what in the heck are we doing to damage our good bacteria? What are these practices? Well, food is number one. When we have food that's low in fiber, that's high in carbs, that misses out on the good fats, that challenges the gut bacteria. It doesn't allow the good species, those good populations to flourish, and that sets the stage for problems. But beyond that, when we drink water that is chlorinated to kill the bacteria, when we abuse antibiotics, which is so prevalent in America, 4 out of 5 Americans takes an antibiotic every year. And, when we recognize that 75% of the antibiotics that we use in America are used in cattle, they're used in the very food that we then eat, it's a scary proposition. We are bombarding our microbiome. We are changing our good gut bacteria. And as a consequence, what leading-edge peer-reviewed research is telling us is that we're setting the stage for illness. And my mission is to at least give the public, through this venue, through us having this discussion today, this information that we need to think twice about our food choices. We need to ask ourselves, do we really need to take a antibiotic every time we have the sniffles? We really have to be careful with how we're treating our microbiome, because that should be considered an organ in and of itself, like the brain, like the heart, microbiome, a 3-pound organ that has a lot of say in terms of our health.
Dr. Perlmutter, I think what you just told us could be interpreted as saying you think that intestinal parasites are a good thing and they might protect us. Surely that's not what you meant?
Actually, I think we have to rephrase our understanding of parasites. We have lived in a symbiotic relationship with many parasites for over 2 million years. Certainly there are bad parasites, but the majority of the world harbors parasites in their intestines, and it's not an issue. As a matter of fact, we are now seeing wonderful science report giving people eggs of worms, so they'll grow worms in their intestines to treat certain inflammatory and autoimmune conditions, and that research is happening right here in America.
Such as, what kinds of inflammatory conditions would you treat with parasites?
Well, the studies have looked at things like bowel inflammation, ulcerative colitis. There has been some discussion of even rheumatoid arthritis treatment using what are called whipworm eggs. And, it turns out that many of these organisms, even parasites, even worms, are organisms that we've lived in relationship with for a couple million years. We call this the old friend hypothesis, that we've lived with these guys and we've gotten along, and as a matter of fact, they've helped us out to a significant degree. So while it may seem challenging, Terry, my statement should be interpreted to consider that there may be some advantage to gut parasites. I mean, those of us in healthcare are always looking at treatments of this form or that form to get rid of parasites, but, understand that we've had parasites in our gut only until the last 100 years. We've lived in its relationship with a whole host of organisms, viruses, fungi, worms, parasites, and now we're sterilizing the gut, and it's changing things. It's changing our immune system.
Dr. Perlmutter, our listeners often learn best from stories. Now, we all recognize N's of one are not really science. Anecdotes don't prove anything. And yet in your book, you talk about some interesting examples. For example, the story about Jason and autism, or Carlos and multiple sclerosis, and Margaret, a life on antibiotics. Could you share some of those anecdotes with our listeners?
Well, I'd be delighted. So Jason is a very sweet 10-year-old child who I think came to see me probably around maybe a year ago now it's been, and had fairly advanced autism, couldn't really speak more than single words, and made very poor eye contact, sat in the corner moving his hands around, and couldn't be moved. And the suspicion was raised that there was an event with respect to his gut bacteria, in that his mother was on antibiotics for her entire third trimester of pregnancy with him. And then he had been actually aggressively treated with antibiotics multiple times for pneumonia. And I had the discussion with his mother about the role of the gut bacteria, about the research indicating now that there is overgrowth seen in autistic children of a certain species of bacteria called Clostridia. And I proposed to her to consider this technique, fecal transplant, where she would identify a donor, and she actually did this procedure at home, found a healthy 12-year-old, harvested her fecal material, and infused it into her son. Well, this was happening while I was giving a lecture in Germany, and his mother emailed me, texted me a video clip of Jason jumping up and down on a trampoline talking to his mother after his second or third fecal transplant. She subsequently sent me another video of him speaking about what he's going to have for lunch and visiting with his friend. And oddly enough, I got a video from him just last week where he was giving a book report on Benjamin Franklin. And I'm going to tell you, it is an N of one. It's an important N of one. The plural of anecdotes is data. His mother wrote me a letter and just said that she has the son that she never had. And, certainly for your listeners, I'm not going to say that this should be looked upon as a treatment for autism. But the point I'll make is that we are beginning to understand that things going on in the gut in terms of their creation of chemicals, in this case we're focused on a fatty acid called propionic acid, known to be dramatically elevated in autistic children, made by specific gut bacteria like the Clostridial species, that reprogramming the gut bacteria can have dramatic response in people. We've actually, with his mother's permission, put videotapes. These exact videotapes that I've mentioned to you are on my website that people can look at with his story, again, with his mother's permission. Carlos is a 43-year-old gentleman who 10 years ago began having troubles walking, got worse with time. I saw him 8 months ago. He had to have 2 canes with which to support himself, aggressive multiple sclerosis, an aggressive history of antibiotic exposure. He went to England and underwent this fecal microbial transplant, along with my providing him aggressive oral probiotic therapy. And he sent me a video of himself walking down the hallway without any assistance whatsoever. I'm going to be creating a special on this topic for public television, and he's going to be there in the audience, and these are real people, and certainly they're ends of one, as you say. There's individual cases. This is not a case history, or rather a report of 20 cases. But that said, there are published reports now coming out of Australia of treating an autoimmune condition, an inflammatory condition, goes by the name of multiple sclerosis, treating that condition under the direction of a Dr. Barodi, using fecal transplant and reversing the symptoms. So, we're in a very nascent stage of our understanding here, but these are powerful examples that certainly take my breath away when I see what happens, and certainly make me realize that finally, we've got a whole new arena to explore in terms of treating neurological conditions for which we have been empty-handed for as long as I've been practicing medicine. Neurology pretty much used to be diagnose and adios, meaning you make a diagnosis and there's nothing else to tell a person. But how wonderful it is that the door is open to this whole new area of exploration, and I'm very, very excited by it.
You're listening to Dr. David Perlmutter, a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. He's the author of Grain Brain, and his new book is Brain Maker. And Joe, I'd just like to say there's still so much we don't know about the balance of gut bacteria. When you start messing around with ecological systems, it's easy to make mistakes.
We need to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll find out why fermented foods are so good for us.
You may have heard of kombucha and kimchi, or perhaps you haven't. What are they?
Learn about prebiotics and the types of foods that can support the intestinal microflora.
What can we learn about the microbiome from modern-day South American people who live by hunting and gathering?
Does periodic fasting have any benefits?
Discover which fruits and veggies are really good and which are not so good.
And we'll get Dr. Perlmutter's typical dinner menu.
You're listening to The People's Pharmacy with Joe and Terry Graydon.
If you like the information you hear when you listen to The People's Pharmacy, you may also enjoy our book published by National Geographic. It's The People's Pharmacy Quick and Handy Home Remedies, available online at peoplespharmacy.com or at your favorite bookstore.
Welcome back to The People's Pharmacy. I'm Terry Graydon.
And I'm Joe Graydon. The People's Pharmacy is brought to you in part by Redix Industries, makers of utterly smooth foot cream with shea butter, helping dry, cracked feet feel soft and smooth. The number's 800-345-7339. The website, uttercream.com.
If you'd like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1002. That number again, 800-732-2334. Or place the order online at peoplespharmacy.com.
Our topic today is the power of gut microbes to heal and protect the brain. We've been discussing diet, bacteria, parasites, and how the body's reactions to what's in our digestive tract affects the way we think and feel.
We're talking with Dr. David Perlmutter, a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. He is the author of Grain Brain, and his new book is Brain Maker.
Dr. Perlmutter, if we were to go back hundreds and hundreds of years, our ancestors were very big on fermented food, and part of the reason was they didn't have refrigeration. They didn't have a way of preserving food in a way that was simple. You just stick it in the fridge and take it out in 3 or 4 days or a week or two. They used fermentation. Why have you suggested in your book that fermentation is so important?
Well, fermentation is a process that will naturally occur in foods when the bacteria in the foods break down the sugar, and that allows them to use their metabolism and also to replicate, so you have more bacteria. So it isn't just that it's of historical interest. I mean, we have evidence that people have been actively fermenting food for at least 7,000 years. But beyond that, food will naturally ferment on its own anyway when you just leave it out, which is obviously what we've done. So the great thing about today's fermented foods, whether it's kimchi or kombucha, yogurt.
Kombucha, whatcha?
And kimchi.
I'll walk you through it.
Okay.
We'll get to these. Is that these are foods in which bacteria are still alive and replicating and are available to the people who consume these foods. So kimchi is a traditional Korean spicy creation that's made with cabbage and oftentimes cucumber. It's very easy to make, but you can buy it ready-made in the health food store. And it is loaded with wonderful, good probiotic bacteria. Kombucha tea has become very, very popular. I even saw it in an airport recently. And again, this is a fermented tea loaded with sugar, but then the sugar gets fermented, so there's really no sugar left. But again, this is a bottle of live organisms. Like, people have known about yogurt, probiotic in yogurt, and I think you have to be really careful about the quality of the yogurt you get to make sure you're getting still some good organisms.
Dr. Perlmutter, could you please spell kombucha? And
kombucha is spelled with a K, Kombucha.
Now, we've heard that people can actually make this at home. How would they do that?
Nothing to it. You get a big pot, you brew some tea, you put the tea in the big pot, and you put in some sugar, which, it's strange for us to have a bag of sugar at home, but knowing that it'll be fermented, you don't have to worry about it. Then you have to buy a mother. And what a mother is this glob of active active organisms that you can buy online. Many health food stores will sell that to you. It doesn't look very appealing, but you drop that in, and then this process of fermentation begins. And in a week, you have a whole gallon now of kombucha. You can put it in a bottle, and it's delightful. So
when you ferment sugar, I'm just curious. When you ferment sugar, don't you get alcohol?
There is a small amount of alcohol in kombucha, and it's minimal.
Okay.
Other forms of fermentation create lactic acid. That's what happens, for example, in kimchi. This is called lactic acid fermentation.
Uh-huh.
And the acid actually lowering the pH like that is a beneficial thing because it helps to get rid of organisms that are not helpful, that could be detrimental, and helps to that's what keeps the food from becoming rancid. So prior to refrigeration, as you well mentioned, this was a technique that allowed food to be preserved over time. So these are foods that we call probiotic foods. They're rich in probiotic bacteria, but we also want to supply to our good gut bacteria what they want to eat. And the best thing that we can give them are what are called prebiotic foods, prebiotic fiber. Now, for years, people have been talking about why fiber is really healthy. We have to have lots of fiber in the diet for this, that, and the other. But it turns out that one of the most important functions of fiber, specifically prebiotic fiber, and I'll describe that in just a moment, is how prebiotic fiber nurtures the good bugs that are already there. So foods that contain specific types of prebiotic fiber that go by the name of inulin and fructooligosaccharides, let's leave that aside. Let's just look at the foods. And these are foods like dandelion greens and asparagus, onions, garlic, jicama, which is Mexican yam, one of my favorites, Jerusalem artichoke. These are foods, chicory root, that are very, very high content of what is called prebiotic fiber. Now, Terry, as a medical anthropologist, you'd probably be interested to know that our Paleolithic ancestors consumed as much as 135 grams of prebiotic fiber each day. Compare that to what Americans are eating today, it's about 5 grams. So our prehistoric ancestors were on a diet that did nothing short of just nurture the heck out of the bacteria living within their gut, giving those good bacteria what they needed to be happy. Well, we're not doing that these days. We've cut back on their fuel source, and we don't seem to eat a lot of fermented foods. So the food choices should then be low carb, as we said earlier, free of sugar if possible, higher in the good fats, the olive oils, nuts, seeds, grass-fed beef, eggs, what a wonderful food, and also rich in both prebiotic fiber-rich foods, like I mentioned, and foods that are fermented, that contain these probiotic bacteria.
Might this explain why the Mediterranean diet appears to be healthful? And while you're talking about our Paleolithic or Neolithic ancestors, there was just recently research published on the microbiome of a nomadic group, which is as close as we can get in today's world to...
in South America, yes.
Yes, in Venezuela, the Yanomami hunter-gatherer group, their microbiome is immensely more varied than ours, much richer in diversity. Perhaps
Absolutely.
they're eating a lot of foods that are high in these fibers.
Well, not only that, but they're also not traumatizing their gut with antibiotics all the time, and they live a life that's perhaps hygienically less aggressive than we seem to think is important.
I think that's a safe bet.
Yeah, no question. And interestingly, what was found in that study was that they had a higher level of a group of organisms called treponemes. And treponemes, to us here in America, make the hair stand up on the back of our neck. I mean, after all, that's what syphilis is, treponema pallidum. So we think, oh my gosh, these people have treponemes. And it gets back to our conversation before about now rephrasing how or reimagining how we think about bugs as being bad. Are all parasites bad? Well, no, they're not. Are treponemes all bad? Obviously not. This group of individuals seems to be doing quite well in the presence of treponemes. So, we have this sense about bacteria that dates back to the 14th century, the bubonic plague that wiped out a third of Europe, and we think all bacteria are bad. Well, it turns out that if it weren't for our gut bacteria, we would instantly die. So we have to rephrase our position or re-examine our position on bacteria in general and recognize that this germ theory that bugs are bad has really, pulled the rug out from under us in terms of what's really going on. So that was a very interesting study for sure.
Dr. Perlmutter, we were just talking about the Yanomami, and in addition to the fact that the hygiene may be different and the foods that they're eating is almost certainly different, my suspicion is that there are times when they don't have anything to eat. Is that why you recommend periodic fasting?
Well, I don't recommend it because these people may fast. I recommend it really based upon the peer-reviewed work, the work of Dr. Mark Mattson at the National Institute on Aging, demonstrating that fasting is a way of changing your gene expression. What a notion. It's an epigenetic factor. It changes the expression of our genes and allows the expression of genes that will code for reduction of inflammation. And more importantly, from my perspective, fasting actually increases the body's production of a chemical called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. Quite simply, it's the brain's growth hormone. It allows us to grow new brain cells. It allows our brains to make new connections, and it serves as a way of protecting and even healing damaged neurons. So there's a lot of work that looks at the effect of caloric restriction and or fasting on multiple parameters of gene expression that are positive. So We've always fasted. Humans, we've never, this notion of 3 meals a day, I mean, I don't know where that came from. Maybe you have an inkling as a medical anthropologist, but, humans as foragers, as hunter-gatherers, had to be geared genetically for times of feast and times of famine. That's been our nature, and our genome has evolved to survive and to be most functional in that sort of scenario. So, fasting, I think, is a very important thing to engage.
Dr. Perlmutter, when it comes to making food choices, we've heard, goodness knows how many times, eat more fruits and vegetables. But not all fruits and vegetables are created equal. So what are the good ones, in quotes, and what are the ones that we probably should save for special occasions?
Well, let me first say that your cells don't know that it's your birthday or it's your anniversary or it's a special occasion. You really got to do your best because every day is a holiday, if you look at the calendar. So I think the important thing is to understand, first of all, that fruits in their natural presentation are obviously better choices than products made from fruit. For example, people think that the right beverage to drink in the morning is a nice 12-ounce glass of orange juice. And truthfully, I'm speaking to you today from Florida. So, orange juice is big here, as it is in California. And that said, a 12-ounce glass of orange juice is already going to start your day with 9 teaspoons of sugar, 36 grams of pure sugar. That's the same as a can of soda. So, eating an orange is certainly a different story. But that's also still going to provide you a lot of sugar. But then again, the release of that sugar is going to be more measured. We have apples these days that are monstrous in size and are cultivated in such a way as to increase their sugar content because it does two things. People like sweet and it extends their shelf life. So I think we have to look at all the fruits that we consume and recognize that they represent a potential risk in terms of a sugar load. To have an apple a day probably isn't a terrible thing. A banana has plenty of sugar in it, but perhaps a banana a day is not terrible. But I'd say that I'd like your listeners to consider favoring more vegetables, especially those that grow above the ground in contrast to those growing below the ground, and especially colorful because that's an indication to some degree of nutrient diversity, if not nutrient density.
So what do we find at the Perlmutter household, a typical Saturday evening dinner at home?
Well, generally it'll be fish because I catch a lot of fish. In the summer we eat a lot of mahi because we go fishing for mahi. We eat a lot of salmon. We will eat grass-fed beef and other grass-fed meats. But oftentimes several days will go by without any meat whatsoever and the world doesn't come to an end. So the point is, though, that these issues, the proteins, the fish, the poultry, the red meat, are not the focus of the meal. They're the side dish. The plate is mostly occupied by the vegetable parts, the fibrous vegetables, the above-ground vegetables, the colorful, rich, nutrient-dense vegetables. We relegate the meat dishes now to being almost the condiment, if not the side dish. And there's always going to be on that plate some form of either prebiotic and or a probiotic type of food. So kimchi is added to the plate, dandelion greens, jicama, which is such an easy food to work with. The plate is loaded with those kinds of fibrous foods that are rich in prebiotics and some of them have been fermented. And that's what it would look like. I might have a glass of wine in the evening. I probably don't drink enough. I should drink more. I have coffee in the morning. And even every once in a while, a couple of squares of chocolate with low sugar, high cocoa content chocolate. So it's not this draconian, restrictive, Spartan kind of existence. It's, boy, I love to eat, and I love to help my wife cook, and look forward in the future to growing more of our food. So we have a great time with food.
Dr. Perlmutter, what is the message for our listeners today from your book, Brain Maker, The Power of Gut Microbes to Heal and Protect Your Brain for Life?
The message is one of empowerment, that these are the tools that each and every reader can implement to safeguard his or her brain, to embrace the notion that brain disease is preventable, and this is new information. We now understand this powerful role of the gut bacteria. We never understood that, but now it's front and center in leading-edge research, and it's really given us an incredible tool, and it's user-friendly information. It's implementing these tools to safeguard your brain.
Dr. David Perlmutter, thank you very much for talking with us on the People's Pharmacy today.
Absolutely my pleasure.
You've been listening to Dr. David Perlmutter. He's a board-certified neurologist and fellow of the American College of Nutrition. His publications include Grain Brain and the new book, Brain Maker, The Power of Gut Microbes to Heal and Protect Your Brain for Life. His website is drperlmutter.com. That's drperlmutter.com. There's a link to his website from peoplespharmacy.com.
I think Dr. Perlmutter has given us all something to think about. Lynn Siegel produced today's show. Russ Henry engineered the program. Dave Graydon edits our interviews.
The People's Pharmacy is produced at the studios of North Carolina Public Radio, WUNC.
The People's Pharmacy theme music is by B.J. Liederman.
The People's Pharmacy is made possible by Red-X Industries, makers of Utterly Smooth Extra Care 20 Cream with 20% urea for extra skin protection. The number's 800-345-7339, online at uttercream.com.
If you would like to order a CD of today's show or any other People's Pharmacy broadcast, you can call 800-732-2334. Today's show is number 1002. That number to call, 800-732-2334. You can also find the show on our website, peoplespharmacy.com.
When you visit our site, you can check out prescription drugs, herbal medicines, and home remedies. You'll find our listen and read opportunity for this topic. You can also share your own experience and thoughts on today's show.
You could sign up for our free online newsletter or the free podcast of the show. You need never miss another People's Pharmacy program, and you can share it with a friend. It's all there at peoplespharmacy.com.
In Durham, North Carolina, I'm Joe Graydon.
And I'm Terry Graydon. Thank you so much for listening today. And please, join us again next week.
We hope you enjoyed this podcast. If so, please consider taking a minute to write a review on iTunes. And thanks for listening to the People's Pharmacy.
If you love chilling mysteries, unsolved cases, and a touch of mom-style humor, Moms and Mysteries is the podcast you've been searching for. Hey guys, I'm Mandy.
And I'm Melissa. Join us every Tuesday for Moms and Mysteries, your gateway to gripping, well-researched true crime stories. Each week, we deep dive into a variety of mind-boggling cases as we shed light on everything from heists to whodunits. We're your go-to podcast for mysteries with a motherly touch. Subscribe now to Moms and Mysteries wherever you get your podcasts.